Petros. I'm a research fellow at the Institute for Textual Scholarship and Electronic Editing at the University of Birmingham. And I am very glad to introduce François Pacha Miran, who is the author of this excellent book. François, it is clear from the book that he has very good command of the Aramaic language. He graduated with a diploma from the prestigious École du Louvre, and he's now working on a doctorate at the École Pratique des Hautes Études, also in Paris. His doctoral advisor is Joanna Rapti. His topic are Syriac lectionaries of the 11th through 13th centuries. Now, the book that I'm talking about today is derived from his master's thesis. It is not common for a master's thesis to be published in this form, but in this case, the quality of the work is such that it fully deserves to have appeared in print. Despite its title, the book is not merely a study of the illustrations of a manuscript, but rather a complex examination of the book as an object, as a cultural artifact. We are talking about the Syriac manuscript, probably of 6th century date, which is preserved now at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. It has been digitized recently, and it can also be viewed online in Gallica, which is the online platform of the French National Library. Now, what François does is, first of all, in the second half of his book, which is the properly art historical portion of it, he examines in great detail and very competently the iconography of the miniatures in that manuscript. There are, if I remember correctly, 22 or 23 Figaro miniatures in the book, which is a complete copy of the Bible, a biblical pantext, which is by itself a remarkable fact. Now, but besides this art historical examination, we also have a very detailed and competent paleographic and codicological study of the manuscript. What I particularly appreciated was the fact that François looks at the book not simply as a container of texts and images, but also as an object. So he tries to establish, hypothetically of course, its functional context and its symbolic role at the time when it was produced and during its subsequent history. At the very beginning, we have what was to me a fascinating story of the provenance of the book. We learn how it arrived in Paris. This ties, of course, with the current trend of fashion, if you will, in the cultural history of things. Also, a very novel and noteworthy aspect of the book is that François has collaborated with an international team of scholars who have examined the manuscript through non-invasive methods, as it is possible to do now, and established the chemical composition of the pigments and inks used by the people who produced the manuscript. This is really extremely valuable, and it is great to see this probably for the second time in a monograph dedicated to an illuminated manuscript. The first example that I can think of is Tom Matthews's study of the Gladstone Gospels in Los Angeles, which appeared quite some time ago, but it has had no follow-up since then, up to the appearance of François's book. Now, at this point, I will hand over to François. I urge you to ask questions, and once you have typed them into the chat or into the question and answer section, you will have the pleasure of having them heard, of hearing them read out loud with a Bulgarian accent. Over to you, François.
Thank you very much, Georgi, for this very beautiful introduction. I will now share my screen so that you can see some pictures of the manuscript. It will be more interesting. Yes. Okay, does everybody see my screen, I hope? Thank you very much, Petros, to have accepted my application, and to all the organizers and attenders. As said, I'm currently finishing my PhD in Syriac studies at École Pratique des Hautes Études. And the book we are presenting now originated in my master's degree, written from 2014 to 2016. As the French Society of Syriac Studies proposed me to publish my dissertation in order to give a broader visibility to the so-called Syriaque Bible of Paris, I therefore had to go in depth into my researches during the 3 following years, enlightening some aspects of this manuscript that still needed to be studied. The book's publication was assumed together with the French National Library, who offered all the color pictures of the manuscript, and the publication was financially supported by my own laboratory, Labex Resmed, at Sorbonne University. The manuscript known as Paris Syriaque Bible presently consists in an impressive Bible, which was originally gathering the Old and the New Testament in a single volume of around 330 sheets of parchment. It has been acquired by the French National Library in 1909 by Mar Oddoi and the Syriac Chaldean Archbishop of Siirt in Iraqi Kurdistan, so nowadays Turkey. Today, this Bible contains the most part of the Old Testament and some fragments of the New Testament, following the Syriac Common Version of the Holy Scripture, which is called Peshito. The text is written on 3 columns in an elegant calligraphy called Estrangelo, with some later additions and careful restorations in diverse Oriental Syriac handwritings. The Paris Syriac Bible has been studied since the beginning of the 20th century because of its iconographical cycle, which may have originally consisted in about 40 miniatures. Only 24 remain today, and these images are dispersed throughout the text of the manuscript as they underline the beginning and the end of each biblical book. They mostly illustrate the Old Testament, as you can see here, with the depiction at the beginning of Exodus, of Joshua and Job, for example, but 2 of them remain as from the New Testament. By comparison of the handwriting with some dated Syriac manuscript, and on many artistic grounds, we can assume that the Paris Syriac Bible has been written and adorned during the 6th century. It signifies that this manuscript is, to this day, the oldest illustrated Bible in the world. And this important manuscript actually remains partially unknown amongst Byzantine art historians, in spite of its essential interest for our understanding of Christian book illumination during the late antiquity. The textual content of the manuscript has been studied by paleographs, text historians, and Syriac Bible editors during the second half of the 20th century. But our understanding of this Bible still lacked a holistic consideration of the relationship between biblical text, images, and Syriac spiritual tradition, including liturgy and liturgical chant. Amongst the most intriguing aspects I looked at, the first consists in the geographical situation of the workshop involved in the realization of the Paris Syriac Bible. Even if its exact localization still remains unknown, I consider that it was produced in northern Mesopotamia, in a geographical area including Mardin, Nusaybin, and Mosul. My works then tries to reconsider the pertinence of these 3 different hypotheses in the light of paleographical and stylistical comparisons with other dated or undated Syriac manuscripts, and on the light of canonical sources about monasteries and bishoprics in late antiquity, Upper Mesopotamia. Moreover, some marginal notes recently studied inform us about the history of the manuscript and about its journey throughout the region during the Middle Ages until its arrival in Siirt in the 16th century. And I had a particular interest in the study of its travel from Turkey to Paris, as Georgi said, which can be understood thanks to the correspondence between the Syriac Archbishop of Siirt and the librarians of the French National Library. an acquisition which took place in complex and confusing circumstances involving librarians, but also merchants, just before the murder of the Archbishop at the beginning of Sappho. Another important contribution of my study are the scientific analysis of the colors that were carried out for the first time in December 2018 and September 2019, with the courtesy of the French National Library. The results attest the use of precious and expensive substances as ultramarine blue, so lapis lazuli, cinnabar red, and as you can see on screen, gold powder. That's why my book contains a lot of microscopic pictures of the analyzed pigment, results tables, and the spectral analysis curves of the most important colors that can now be compared with other late antique manuscripts which have been chemically analyzed, just like the Tetravangeli of Rabula. The use of such materials allows us to completely reconsider the importance of the manuscript, which has usually been considered by art historians as a modest production. It also confirms the wealth of the Syriac community involved in the command and realization of this Bible, as well as the central place of the Syriac world as a commercial crossroad. And one of the most interesting characteristics of the Paris Syriac Bible miniatures are the numerous links they share with the Syriac spiritual tradition. Some of the images actually show obvious analogies with Saint Ephrem hymns on nativity, crucifixion, or resurrection. For example, as you can see, Aaron's election as the great priest is undertaken by Saint Ephrem as an allegory of the birth of Christ, because his dry stick blossomed and gave fruits, as did the Virgin Mary's womb. And Ephrem,
François,
yes.
François, do you want to change your slides? We can only see the title slide.
Okay.
Please move to the next slide.
Can you see?
No, we can see the title page.
That's not the first time it appears. Excuse me. And now?
There we go, splendid. Thank you.
Yes, I'm so sorry. That's a typical technical problem. So you can see some pictures I wanted to show you, and the miniatures of the Old Testament, the handwriting and comparison with a dated manuscript written in 528, a map of the different possible localization of the workshop, the material we used for the technical color analysis, the results showing the use of ultramarine blue, lapis lazuli, gold powder, for example, and the links between the miniatures and Ephrem's hymns. As I was saying, Ephrem also compared the episode of the blossoming of Aaron's dry stick to the resurrection of Christ. And then, another interesting example, the serpent of bronze is interpreted by Saint Ephrem as an allegory of the cross, which heals the bites of the devil. And several parallels can be found between Solomon, the Virgin, the Child, and the Church that illustrate the beginning of the Book of Wisdom in Ephrem's hymns on nativity, for example, but also other parallel can be found with Saint Jacob of Serug homilies on the Church. This observation underlines the fact that the Syriac artists used numerous sources of inspiration to create the miniatures of the Paris Syriac Bible, including canonical and apocryphal texts, liturgical texts, and practices. Finally, this manuscript offers us a precious testimony about the vigor and richness of the Syriac communities at the end of antiquity. From an artistic point of view, the stylistic comparisons between the images of the Paris Syriac Bible and other lavishly illustrated manuscripts produced during the 5th and 6th centuries in Constantinople, Syria, Egypt, or Italy, shows close similarities between Syriac, Byzantine, Armenian, and Latin manuscripts. My work then intends to underline that the Syriac culture wasn't isolated at all. Such similarities attest the strong artistic relationships of Syriac communities and their connection to the rest of the Christian Mediterranean world. Thank you very much for your attention.